The judge announced that the will left me with nothing. My father grinned. My brother, Nolan, clasped his hands together as though victory was already his. Standing at the lectern with a folder held tightly against my chest, I waited for the room to quiet down. Then I spoke. You overlooked the box. Every face in the probate courtroom turned toward me. My father's smile faded instantly. Nolan stared in surprise. Judge Mercer lifted his eyes from the documents and asked me to go on. That was the moment everything shifted. But to understand why I remained so composed, you need to know how I found myself in that courtroom, listening to men who had rarely visited my grandfather in years explain why I was entitled to nothing. My name is Claire Harlan. I was 62 years old when my grandfather passed away. For 34 years, I taught English in Dayton. I lived on a modest income and measured success by the former students who returned to say hello years later. My father, Brent, considered that outlook sentimental. His favorite was Nolan, a successful contractor with a booming laugh and a costly watch. During family gatherings, Dad discussed business with him while treating me as little more than an afterthought. The one person who made that easier to bear was my grandfather, Walter Harlan. He was a veteran of the Korean War, a dairy farmer, and the kindest man I had ever known. After my grandmother died, he became more reserved. My father's visits grew briefer with each passing year. Nolan only showed up when there was something practical to discuss: land, taxes, bank accounts, or future plans. I visited every Tuesday after work. I brought groceries, organized his medications, repaired his printer, and sat with him at the kitchen table while he drank coffee and shared stories from his life. One evening, when age had already weakened him, he looked over the rim of his mug and said, "People reveal who they really are once they think you're no longer useful." I asked him what he meant. He simply smiled and changed the subject. The final year of his life was difficult. His knees failed him, his eyesight worsened, and one icy morning in February he fell inside the barn. I rode with him in the ambulance. I remained by his side through rehabilitation, took notes from doctors, and learned the names of medications no one else cared enough to remember. A nurse once told me, "He talks about you as if you're the only dependable thing left in his life." About 6 months before he died, he placed a small brass key into my palm. "If it becomes important," he said, "you'll know where it belongs." I tucked it into my purse and, before long, stopped thinking about it. When he died peacefully in his sleep, grief hit me like a storm, sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. The church was filled with neighbors and townspeople during the funeral. I believed the hardest part of that week was over. I was mistaken. The moment the service ended, Brent and Nolan started speaking with attorneys. Within days, I found myself in probate court while their lawyer confidently argued that the will was straightforward and that I was entitled to nothing. So I opened my folder. Inside were documents taken from a locked metal box hidden in the workshop, the box opened by the brass key. Walter had left behind letters, financial paperwork, and a separate trust created by an independent estate attorney named Evelyn Shaw. Judge Mercer spent a long time reading in silence. Finally, he looked up. "Did your grandfather retain private legal counsel?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "And he kept detailed records." The courtroom fell silent as the judge uncovered the trust. It had been established years earlier and controlled most of the assets that existed outside the probate process. There were meeting notes, signed acknowledgments, and a handwritten letter from Walter himself stating that he feared being treated more like a wallet than a father. When the judge read that sentence aloud, I had to lower my eyes. The investigation lasted for weeks. Financial records were examined. Caregivers were questioned. Piece by piece, the full picture emerged. Walter had realized that certain accounts and property transfers were being managed without complete transparency. Long before anyone else took his concerns seriously, he had already taken steps to protect himself. In the end, the trust stood. My father and brother received far less than they had anticipated. A significant portion of the estate was directed toward local charities and educational funds that Walter had personally selected. The remainder came to me, not as a prize, but as evidence that he trusted me to honor his intentions. I felt no sense of victory. What I felt was the ache of being loved so clearly and realizing it too late to thank him for it. Months afterward, I used the land to support small farms rather than selling it to developers. I established scholarships for students pursuing careers as teachers and librarians. Eventually, Nolan called to apologize. Brent never truly did, although his tone became gentler with time. Then one evening, while sorting through the last of Walter's belongings, I discovered a handwritten note. It read, "The greatest inheritance is not property. It is knowing who you are when the property is gone." I keep that note in my desk today. Whenever I think back to that courtroom, I remember the key, the box, the stillness that came before the truth emerged, and the man who cared enough about me to prepare for both the worst and the best that life could bring.